You've knit your hat according to the directions, where you started out with about 3 inches of plain knitting, 5 inches of knitting and purling any way you want in a random pattern, and now it's time to shape the top of your hat. This is the most fun part of knitting. It's why hats are nicer than scarves. You actually get to make a shape as you knit. First, you need to put markers in, and I'm sure you've made markers. You know, we had a little lesson on how to make markers, so you've got plenty of markers. Starting with a red marker, place your markers at even intervals, 8 markers. Divide your knitting up. If you have 88 stitches, put your markers 11 stitches apart. Now here's my beginning of knitting. There's my red marker. For this hat, it doesn't really matter if you start at the beginning. Nobody will know the difference. So I have placed my markers at the appropriate intervals, and now I am ready to start my decreases. All my markers are in place. I'm going to decrease 8 times every other round. I will knit to the red marker, and when I get to the red marker, I will slip it from the left needle to the right, and I'll say to myself, this is a new round. This is a decrease round. And I'm going to knit, 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 knit until I get to 2 stitches before the next marker, and then I will knit 2 together. So here we go. And when we get to 2 stitches before the marker, we will knit 2 together. Now, the way to knit 2 together is to go in as if you're knitting 1 stitch but knit 2. Sometimes it's a little tight or a little difficult, so you can go in, loosen those stitches up, and then knit 2 together. And there is your first decrease. Now slip the marker from the left to the right and knit, 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 knit until you get to the next marker. And you will continue around until by the time you get to the red marker, knit 2 together. When you get to the red marker, okay, 1 past the marker, and you'll go all the way around. When you get to the red marker, you will knit these 2 together, and you'll say, that's your last decrease. Slip the red marker, and you'll knit another round of plain knitting. Keep all the markers in place and count, and you'll notice that you have 1 less stitch per section than you did before. If you started with 11, you now have 10. Knit around again, get to the red marker, say to yourself, this is a new round and this is a decrease round, and then decrease again, and then knit plain again. You will continue this until you have quite a few decreases, and you can actually see them. Look at the decreases, all leaning to the right. Knit 2 together leans to the right, and if you do knit 2 together, you can see why. You're pointing to the right as you knit 2 together. There are other decreases that lean to the left, but now we're just worried about the ones that knit to the right. Now, I have decreased so many stitches that I have only 2, 4, 6, I have only 7 stitches per round. And it's getting a bit tight. If I try to continue knitting without changing my needles, I'm going to have a problem. And the problem will be the knitting will try to stretch out. Therefore, it's time to switch to double points. Double pointed needles are the way knitting started, and here we are using the same simple primitive tools. I like to use sets of 5. You will place the stitches on 4 of the needles evenly, 2 sections per needle, and we'll knit with the 5th, as you will see. So here I am ready to transfer to double points, and I'm not starting at the red marker because every other marker will fall off. I will knit to the marker. Now I'm about ready to start with my double points. This marker falls off. I'm still going to have a decrease point there, but the marker can't stay on the needle. I'm going to pull up my right end, pick up a double point, and I'm going to continue knitting as if I were not knitting with a double point. Double points are no big deal. You're still working with 2 points of a needle. Now I'm going to knit, and I'm going to put 2 sections on each of my needles. There is my marker, slip the marker, and I knit 1 more section. Now you notice I didn't decrease because I happen to know I'm on a plain round. How did I know I was on a plain round? Because I read my knitting. Look, here are 2 stitches turning into 1. That's a decrease. So I know in the previous round I decreased, and I know in this round I don't have to decrease. You don't have to remember it, just look at your knitting. So I've got 2 sections on 1 double point. This marker falls off. If you try putting it on here, it will fall off on its own, so why bother? Just take it off. Now you pick up another double point and you continue knitting around. Done with the needle, center the needle so things don't fall off like that. Now I'm ready to knit with my next 2 sections with the second double point. Now you should make sure you pull that stitch tight when you knit that first stitch, and even the second stitch, knit it firmly so you know that you won't have any gaps between your double pointed needles. There's my decrease in the previous round. Keep that marker in place, it's not going to fall off, and knit to the next marker. Alright, there's 2 more sections on 1 double point, pick up a third. Notice the art of using double points is learning how to ignore what you're not using. That's all there is to it. You're still knitting with 2 points. Ignore the rest of them. Alright, here we go. Another section. Keep this marker in place because it won't fall off, and we do need markers. And here we are, another section. That marker falls off, almost. That marker falls off. And now we have 2 sections left, and look here. Here is our red marker. That's why we didn't start at the red marker. We want to make sure the red marker stays in place because that's our decrease. That's our beginning of round. All right, now I say to myself, this is a new round. This is a decrease round. How do I know it's a decrease round? Because I just knit a plain round. So now I'm going to knit to 2 stitches before the next marker, and then I'm going to knit 2 together. Now, the marker's gone, but the decrease point is still there. The marker has gone from the needle to the pile, and the decrease point is now in your head. The marker is in your head. You still have to decrease at that point. So I knit 2 together. All right, this is done. Start another hat with that needle and pick up your 50 PN double pointed needle. All right, now I'm going to continue knitting around. I like to place the needle I'm using on top of the other needles, and you can either knit from underneath or on top, really it's your own preference. Knit to the marker, knit 2 together, slip marker, knit to the next marker. Now remember, the next marker is invisible, but it is there. We still have to knit 2 together at the end of each needle. We still have 8 decrease points. All right, pick up the next double point. Well, as you can see, it's the double point I just cleared. And we just keep knitting around. And keep in mind as you knit that this is the way knitting was done for centuries. In the round on double pointed needles. When they invented knitting, they didn't have the nylon or the plastic they could use for the coil here. All the knitting was done around, in the round, on pointed sticks. They didn't figure out flat knitting for some time. All right, there's my decrease. Knit 2 together. And again, you see I took the empty needle from the left, put it into the right, went on to the next section. See how I pushed the stitches right up on the needle? Knit to 2 before the marker, knit 2 together, slip the marker, knit to 2 before the next marker. Knit 2 together. Now as you knit, you know, you should be counting to make sure you're on track. Make sure you haven't forgotten a decrease. All right, here's my last decrease. Knit 2 together, red marker. This is a new round. This is a plain round. So now you just get to knit plain. Now, again, when you're knitting your plain round, you really should count your stitches and make sure that you have the right number of stitches. So we have done our decreases, and you can see beautiful line swirling to the right. I now have 2 stitches per section, and I'm finishing up the last plain round. And now I meet my red marker and I say, this is my last round and this is a decrease round. So I have 2 stitches per section. I am simply going to knit 2 together all the way around. Knit 2 together. Now at this point, as you might imagine, I'm going to let the markers go because I'm done decreasing. No, knit 2 together here. Oh dear, let's see. A little problem there, but that's all right now. There it is. Knit 2 together. Let that marker go. Knit 2 together here. Loosen them up if you have to. Knit 2 together. Now I think I'll even let that needle go and put 4 stitches on that needle. Knit 2 together. Let the marker go. Pull your yarn up tightly. Knit 2 together. Okay. So our 2 stitches become 1 stitches. Our 8 sections have now turned into 8 stitches. We started out this hat with 88 stitches and now we're down to 8. Knit 2 together, drop the marker. Knit 2 together. I think I'll just let that needle go. Knit 2 together. Now here's my end of round. I have a total, I'll let that marker go. I have a total of 8 stitches. And as it happens, I have them arranged on 3 needles. What I need to do is arrange 4 stitches per 2 needles. And I have to make sure my yarn is coming off the end. I can't let the yarn come out of the middle. So, just make sure we have it on correctly. Here we are. We have 4 stitches and 4 stitches and 2 needles. Before we join these stitches, make sure you count and you have the right number. Now we are going to join these stitches with these stitches, not the way most people finish a hat. Here's what most people do. They cut the yarn, they thread it on a blunt needle, they put it through all the stitches and pull tight. And you know what it looks like? It looks like someone who cut the yarn, threaded it on a needle, put it through all the stitches and pull tight. It looks homemade. I am going to do a little operation called Kitchnener. I am going to sew knitting to make it look like I knit. Specifically, I'm going to join stockinette knitting to stockinette knitting to make it look like stockinette. In order to Kitchnener, we basically need about 1 inch per stitch when I'm just working with average yarn. So theoretically, I need only 4 inches. However, I'll cut it a little longer so that I have enough yarn to work in, but not a lot longer. All right, it's like cutting an umbilical cord, isn't it? The end of your first hat. The yarn is coming from behind and I'm going to thread it on a blunt needle, not a sharp needle. It's got to be blunt. Kitchnener involves 4 steps. Step 1 is done once. Step 2 is done once. Step 3 and 4 are repeated over and over again till the Kitchenering is done. In this case, it's going to be done very quickly because it's only 4 stitches. This is a good way for you to be learning Kitchener. Yarn's coming from the back. I put it through the first front stitch as if to purl. I'm holding my needles parallel. First front stitch as if to purl, and I leave the stitch on the needle. Now I go under the needle and put it through the first back stitch as if I were going to knit. Notice I said under the needle. I'm not going like this and putting it through, and I'm not going like this. I'm going around and under. First back stitch as if to knit and pull it through. Now I'm going to keep the Kitchener loose because I want to show you how to tighten it up, even though for this I wouldn't really have to. But when you do important Kitchenering, keep it loose and then tighten it up after you Kitchener. Don't Kitchener tightly. Don't Kitchener even normally, because if you happen to Kitchener too tightly, it's very hard to loosen it. All right, step 1, first front stitch as if to purl, leave it on the needle. Step 2, first back stitch as if to knit, leave it on the needle. Step 3, put it through the first front stitch as if to knit, slip it off the needle, and then put your sewing needle through the next front stitch as if to purl, leave it on the needle. Step 4, put it through the first back stitch as if to purl, take it off the needle, put it through the next back stitch as if to knit, leave it on the needle. Okay, now don't even worry about this. It looks awful, but don't worry, we'll take care of that later. Step 3, knit off, purl on. Step 4, purl off, knit on. Step 3, knit off, purl on. Step 4, purl off, knit on. And now everybody panics. They say, oh, what do I do next? What do I do next? Do what you would do if you had 10 stitches. In other words, the first front stitch, knit off, put it into the needle as if to knit and take it off. Now you can't do the next operation because there's no stitch. What would you do if there were 1 stitch left on the back? If there were 10 stitches, the first back stitch as if to purl. All right, we are now Kitchnered. And you might think that looks awful, and it does. But now I'm going to go into this and I'm going to tighten it. And because I left it loose, I can see where I have to tighten it. If I made it almost right, I could easily pull up the wrong stitch. All right, I'm holding my thumb on these stitches to the left and I'm pulling up the first stitch firmly and then each stitch. And what I'm looking for is to let these stitches, as I'm pulling them up, match the stitches around them. All right, and now. Okay, now this stitch you might have noticed before. This was a little loose before I started, so probably later on I'm going to work that in, but that's not part of the Kitchenering. That's a little loose. It wasn't because of the Kitchenering. So that I'll take care of by just working it through later. All right, so there's my Kitchenered stitches. Goes right across the top of the hat, stockinette to stockinette, and it looks like I knit it. Now I will tell you how to work in the ends. You have 2 ends to work in. This end, the beginning, and the end. Starting again with my blunt needle, I am going to just make this piece of yarn disappear down the nearest exit. Looking at it very closely, this is the exit, right where the yarn's coming from. And I'm using again the blunt needle so I don't accidentally split any yarns. All right, that's the end of that. So you would think, but it's not. I'm now going to take a sharp needle. Got a very sharp point. I'm going to go underneath the hat. I'm going to thread my yarn with the sharp needle. And now I'm going to purposely split some yarns. All right. It doesn't really matter how I do it, but I'm going to just work this back and forth, purposely splitting the yarn. Now notice I'm splitting, but I'm not going through to the other side. I'll just take this down a bit here. So when I'm going, I'm kind of imitating a knit stitch. Look, you can't see what I'm doing on that side. That's the point. When you're using your sharp needle, you don't want to split it so you're going to show it, of course. So we're just going to get quite close and just split it. Now I'll tell you something. This is okay for a hat. Now I will work it in a few more stitches. But when I do my important knitting, this is not good enough. I might start my splits that way. But I'll just tell you this in case you're doing some other knitting that you really want to work in neatly. I would split the yarn and then I would use a smaller sharp needle and I would work all the plies in different directions. Okay, so now I would take this and maybe go up here a bit. Now as I say, it doesn't really matter on a sweater like a hat like this, but on something more important than a first hat, you really might want to work your ends in very discreetly, okay? And then maybe when you're done with the end, you just sort of skim it like that. Now, when you separate plies, I'll just do another one to show you. When you separate plies, in some cases, the ply gets very weak because you're unspinning it, basically. So, if that's the case, before you actually sew it, spin it a little bit so that it's not going to come apart as you work it in. So I would just maybe take this one over this way. Oops. And notice how I'm threading the yarn. I'm doubling it and pinching it and holding it very close and just popping it in. Okay, again, I'm going to spin it a little bit just to get a little twist in there so it's not going to come apart. And I'll just go over here. And then later on I'll work in the third ply, just so you can see how I'm doing it. I'm kind of just going up and down, sort of like the way a stitch goes. Of course, once you do this, don't ever, you're not going to be able to take it apart. And once you wear your hat and that gets worked in because it's wool, you'll never get that out. Okay, that's the end of the first one. I'll take care of that one later. You see what I do. Now, here's your beginning. Now, you may remember when you started your hat, you were troubled by that. It didn't like the way it looked. And I said, don't worry about it. As long as you left a little tail, we can fix it. So, thread it first with your blunt needle. And again, see, I'm going like this with the yarn, pinching it, holding it very close, and then it pops right into the needle. Now, I am going to take this yarn and go over that little gap. You might say how, and I say fudge. In other words, just try something. If it looks good, what the heck? It'll be good enough. That looks pretty good, don't you think? Now I will take this, and using my sharp needle, I will work it in on the wrong side of the wool, on the wrong side of the hat. All right, and again, I'm just going to basically, I know I'm going to split the yarn. This is really a matter of fudging again. I think I'm just going to go over like this, and I'll just follow the path of the stitch. Now, you might say to me, you said to do it on the wrong side, and I'm doing it on the right side. Well, in knitting, we call the right side of the knitting the public side, the side everybody sees when you wear it. And when you wear this hat, this becomes the public side because it's a rolled edge hat. It naturally rolls because stockinette stitch rolls. So basically, this is your wrong side of the knitting, the non-public side. Nobody sees it. You can do any secret things you want there. And once again, if it's something important, or maybe you just want to get practice, go ahead and split your plies and work each ply in separately. And again, fold the yarn, pop it into the needle if you think it's a little weak. And sometimes you can spin it, you can see which direction it's already spun in, and you add to that spin. Okay, so I would take this, getting everything else out of the way, and I'll just grab a layer of stitching. Okay, and I'm just going to follow. Now you can see this is not something you're even going to notice on either side, really. And then eventually when you're done, you just work it in a few stitches. Once you cut this, you're fine. It's not going to go anywhere. And I'll do the same thing with the other two plies. Work them in. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the hat looks done, but it's not done until you wash it. Wash it with shampoo, same way you wash your hair. I like to put a little conditioner in after I shampoo it, rinse it thoroughly, blot it in a towel. Try it on, see if you like it. If you want it tighter, if the hat's not tight enough, pull it this way. If the hat is too tight, you can pull it this way while it's damp, let it dry, and then you're done with your first hat. Randomly knit and purled. Ta-ta.